Welcome to Connect to Develop, where we provide insight from healthcare leaders on the hottest topic and trends.
Hello, listeners. Thank you for joining Marney and I for today's topic, which is part one of a series on W-2 to consulting, our journey. I'm your co-host, Erika DeLeon.
All right, Marney, we're going to dive right in. I'm really excited about this topic. It's one that I'm still learning about myself, kind of newly into the consulting space. Excited that we get to unpack it together. You've been doing this for years now, and you seem to have really figured out the formula. And so I would love to kind of first know what made you take the leap from W-2 to consulting. Can you kind of tell us a little bit of background on that? And if there was like a specific moment that pushed you to make that change?
Yeah, great questions. And I think these were ones that I quite frankly had to answer for myself before I was even willing to do it because it's scary. So I would say that just in general, I have a very entrepreneurial mindset. I come from a family of small business owners, people who always said, you know, if you work for yourself, then you can guide the direction and you can decide whether, you know, the company is living up to the morals and value and integrity that you believe in, and you're treating your customers right and you're being true to yourself. So I think I always had that spirit just in general. I would say that pretty much my entire career has been learning one thing. And then when I feel like I've figured out that, never to be a complete master, right? But just enough to know that I feel like I'm competent enough and I've had success, you know, and accolades have come with that success to also validate that, yes, you know, you have figured it out to an extent. I've really wanted to move on to the next thing. I'm not really someone that wants to come in and have the same day every day. I know for some people that kind of stability and that kind of routine is really grounding for them, and that's where they feel most comfortable. And I think if that is your calling, then absolutely stay in that lane and do that. And then there will be other people who want to build. And so one of the things I love doing is sitting around and kind of conceptualizing what could be, and then figuring out how we take a concept into a launch and then growth. And then the second I figure out how to scale it and it's sustaining itself, I then want to move on and learn that next thing. And I think that's probably why I get along so well with healthcare leaders and with surgeons, especially as I'm a lifelong learner. So I started off in B2B sales. I was selling sound systems, message marketing, and background music to medical and regular offices and retail chains and hotels. And so that gave me a really good nuance for outside sales, being able to knock on a door, being told to, you know, absolutely not. That sounds like the stupidest idea in the world. Being able to walk out one door, put a smile on my face, and walk in the next door. So you really had to be able to pivot on your toes and figure out within shaking off whatever happened, albeit good or bad, in the last walk-in and meeting, to walking into that new thing fresh. And who is this person I'm meeting with? What is this business? Who are their clients? How can, if at all possible, what I have add value to their business, which could translate to, let's be honest, sales, increased bookings, etc. And so then I was able to get a great recruiter, landed myself into a surgical device sales rep job with no background, no network, but it was exciting for me. It was the hardest thing in my life. I will be honest, in the first full year, while I was still trying to figure everything out and learn all the procedures and the anatomy and how the technology works and this myriad of how hospital systems are and multi-specialties, there was a series of about 3 months where every other week I called my mom crying saying, I am pretty sure that I am so bad at sales that if someone were a lifelong Starbucks customer and they saw me at that register one day, they would walk in, walk back out, and go to Dunkin' Donuts or, you know, Mr. Bean or something like that. It was that bad. Fast forward 6 months, I'm walking across the stage, Rolex Club, President's Club, stock options, etc. But it's because I had the grit to move through it, right? So then fast forward, I was recruited from my division of Medtronic after being in medical education for a few years, after sales, into this brand new company to me that was this realm of surgery centers. I had stepped foot in maybe 2 surgery centers in the entire 10 years I had been at my last medical device company. And now I was in charge of running strategic initiatives and taking a business need and figuring out what do we need to create, then being able to put the team together and resources, you know, bootstrapping it and launching it and making sure that it built the business in some way. And so once again, I get about 3.5 years into that. And I kind of sat there one day during COVID and I thought, there's got to be something else that I'm supposed to be doing to contribute to not only healthcare, but also to the surgeons who I serve, because they serve their patients, I serve the surgeons. And I thought, I've got a really cush job. I've got things pretty much dialed in. I could probably just post and still do a decent job and, probably not get fired. But if I really want to do something impactful and leave a true legacy on healthcare, I'm not going to be able to do it in this super, super comfortable environment. And so I did a lot of thinking. I looked at my financial situation. I called my board of directors, as we call them, which are previous mentors, current mentors, some of my surgeons, some of my friends completely outside the industry, and said, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Here's why. Here's the financial stability that I have to back me for X amount of time. I think I'm just going to roll the dice. And I did. And it was both the most scary and most freeing thing I had ever done. And fast forward, I'm not homeless. I'm doing okay. And I'm still making an impact 3 years later. What made you, Erika? Because once again, you had an incredible track record at some of the most well-regarded companies in the sectors that you are at. What made you leave?
It's interesting. I think the idea of going into consulting is so scary to kind of take that risk and do that risk assessment, yet you leaned into it. You leaned into that curiosity. You leaned into having, you bet on yourself and took those steps. For me, kind of going back to your question, I was so fearful, and I had thought about it for a while, and I kept kind of putting it on the shelf for a bit before I actually took the first couple of steps. And I would love to kind of hear, what were the first actual steps that you took? Like, what were the first 3 steps, if you can kind of think back, that brought you from curiosity, maybe overcoming some of that fear, to kind of action and, leaning in?
I'm a very methodical person. If you ask anyone who doesn't know me really well, they'll say, Marney just comes up with these ideas and she just goes for it. There's the whole, stupidity and courage walk a really thin line. And sometimes you jump on one side and sometimes you fall into the other, right? I think about things for anywhere from months to years before I even talk about them to my closest friend, family, partner, etc. And it's because I want to figure it out and I want to come to terms with the decision. By the time I actually voice what I would like to do or stop doing, I'm 90% baked, and I've looked at all of the ways it could fail or go well and the ramifications of both sides. What I'm looking for when I talk to people about it is any extreme objection or extreme support. And then I take that into consideration and I move forward. I would say that if you looked at what I did, everything from going from B2B sales into surgical device sales and having my own territory and having to figure that out, to then being blessed with leadership that decided to give me a chance and let me create a role that didn't exist, to create a program that also didn't exist at one of the top surgical device companies in the world, because they believed that I had something that I could help the entire organization for, and then going and building strategic initiatives at another $2 billion, plus dollar company when I worked for the previous Optum entity. I was basically what we call an intrapreneur, which is being an entrepreneur, but inside the safety of a 401k and a W-2 salary and, benefits and all that kind of stuff. I think this was just the natural next progression. I had been able to create things from the ground up, from a pie in the sky idea into execution and scalability, but in the safety net of some incredible leaders and companies. And the next thing was to see if I could just do it myself. Now, the one thing that I think you have to consider is you have to consider your financial necessities. I, at the time, was single, no kids. I had a very nice savings plus completely separate retirement. Plus, I had gotten myself into a situation where at the time my living expenses could be easily covered. I also have the safety net of an amazing family who, not ideal, especially as a 40-year-old woman, could move home with my family if I needed to, and they would support me and, get me up on my feet and everything. And so I felt like if it got to it, I would wait tables or hostess or bartend. I would do something to make money until I could get it up and running. But I think the other thing that you have to have is grit and determination. If you're someone who the first 2 to 3 to 10 stumbling blocks makes you run and hide and, curl up in a ball and give up, don't do it. You've got to bet so hard on yourself that you know that there's no way that you will fail. And it will not be a question of if, it is simply a question of when. And so those are when you can really start off on your own. Now, that's if you're alone and you're the only person that brings in money. If you're in an amazing situation where your partner could easily support the finances for you, them, and if there's a family involved, then that's even better because you don't have the stress or anything like that of a timeline of money running out. So I would say it's just the next progression.
I love that. And what I'm hearing, if I could summarize that, and then I'll answer your question, is you really leaned into the leadership, right? Your board of directors around you where, you may be bouncing ideas, looking for kind of the tangible steps, playing out the scenarios. Of course, your skill set, you bring this skill set and this offering to surgeons that serve patients. You've got the grit and determination. And then there's the self-assessment of, what are the needs? What's that risk look like if I take this next step? And so for our listeners, that provides a little bit of a roadmap is surround yourself with a good leadership team or surrounding support system that can help you get to that next step, really kind of drill down on what your skill set is. And you just got to really lean into your why, your determination, your grit, and then obviously do that self-assessment. So I love that you overviewed that with us, Marney. Or for me, it felt like I was taking a huge risk. So what led me to explore the consulting space was that I kept getting kind of a tap on the shoulder for certain type of projects that had to do with kind of operationalizing either, frameworks, systems, processes, and they would be ad hoc. It would be just, hey, can you take a look at this? Can you provide some feedback? It was within my own kind of community, my network. And
you have a fixer.
Well, it's just so interesting because I never really could narrow down what it was that I was, if someone said a couple of years ago, tell me what you do. I'm like, I like building people that build teams, that kind of that matrix communication. I'm a really effective communicator. I really wasn't sure how to put that into a value prop, but I just noticed that people kept tapping me on the shoulder for, hey, can you take a look at this? And the more that I did that, the more that I started kind of doing something similar to what you described, was kind of asking some questions to those that I trusted in my mentoring circle. And, a lot of them challenged me to bet on myself. And they probably, bet on me before I bet on myself. It took a little bit for me to build that courage and that confidence to kind of take the leap of faith. And, fast forward, I'm about close to, I'm still under a year into it, but I'm happy that I took that step. I'm happy that this is the trajectory that I'm on. And I'm hoping that, continuing to learn, like everything that you've shared, that provides a whole lot of insight because you're much further along. And it just brings the reality is that it takes a lot of work. This isn't meant to be easy. It's not meant to just be a piece of cake. It's going to take a lot of commitment, passion. There's going to be some peaks, and valleys and everything in between, but you really got to stick to it. You got to know why you're in it, what's the value, and then also always continuing that risk assessment.
Let's unpack that a little bit more because we recently did an episode where we talked about identifying your why and utilizing that to create a very fulfilling career that supports you financially. One of the biggest things, the finance aside, right? Because finances can come, if you always drive for Uber, Instacart, etc. There's always something that you can do if you're willing to work to make money. Let's talk about the hardest thing that I feel like very few entrepreneurs talk about, which is the emotional journey that you go through. So Erika, I don't know about you, but I had put myself into a situation where I had placed my entire self-value on being that person that gets the call from the C-suite that I reported to saying, there's a situation here, we need you to fly out and fix it. That was the dopamine hit I want. That was what I needed to know I added value. So the first year, I'm calling it a completely Cinderella story, the first year of consulting, because I immediately got picked up by another incredible leader who ironically hired and mentored the person who had hired and mentored me at the last company. Him and I just hadn't overlapped. And so I literally was solo for about a month and a half when I started interviewing, or 3 weeks actually, when I started interviewing with him. And a month later, I was picked up and flying around and consulting and learning from him and his organization. And then when that ended, because as all great contracts, do, it ended. And I then had to start selling myself. It was an emotional roller coaster. There were days where I sat there in my house and I thought, what are you doing? Like, no one's calling, that phone's not ringing. No one's calling you and flying you somewhere. Does that mean that you have no value and is your time done? I mean, those were some of the darkest days of my adult life, were trying to reframe the value that I could find in myself, that it's not someone else calling me to fly around to fix other people's problems or other people's messes or to help someone identify the great thing from the situation that they were in. It was just me and what I could offer friends just me. And I think that's the hardest part about going from a W-2 into consulting, is on those days when it's so dark because your value, that dopamine, shot isn't being hit, and figuring out how you come through that. Tell me about your experience if you've had that, or if you've not gotten there, because, hey, you've got that to look forward to.
Marney, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because when I think about it, that's part of, I would say, where I'm at right now. I mentioned that I'm kind of just under a year. So there are waves of what you've just talked about in the stage of where I'm at right now. And the emotional toll is there because you're, one, trying to prove yourself. You're trying to create value. You're still trying to figure out, if the risk you took was worth it. I'm still in that early phase. So I think there's a mirror of emotions and things that I'm still processing. But all that said, the upside is I still feel really good that I took this leap, so I feel innately like I made the right step. And yeah, I'm going to work through some of that, but that's why you surround yourself with people, because when you have those moments where you're like, do I really think I can bet on myself? That is when you need to lean on your network, on your leadership, your board of directors, because you're going to need a sounding board. Marney, you've been that for me, so, because again, I appreciate that you have shared not only your background, the journey, and you've been so authentic about what that looks like, because I think that's what our listeners really need to hear. It's easy, if somebody meets you for the first time, they're seeing the success, they're seeing the byproduct of the sum total of everything you did, but they don't know what was behind the doors. And it's so easy, I think, as humans, for us to make assumptions and say, wow, Marney makes it look so easy. She didn't have to go through any trouble. And so this conversation is so critical for anyone who's looking to, they're considering to go from W-2 to consulting. And, it's normal. It's normal to kind of have these phases. Get involved with the right people, go through the process. If you're going through the process of considering going into consulting, it's worth exploring. If there's something innately in you that's curious, it's worth exploring.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Someone said that to me. They were like, bet on yourself. And sometimes that is the hardest thing that we do. Marney, we could talk about this, I think, forever, because there's so much to unpack. And again, I'm just so grateful that you were able to kind of really lay out the history of where you were, what that looked like, the steps you took. And then you gave us a really good, snapshot of what it looks like today for you. So it kind of gives us a really full picture. But this has been great. Again, we could talk about this all day, but I'm going to go ahead and we're going to wrap up today's podcast. And this has been really excited. I almost can imagine that this will be a continuing conversation that we can continue kind of at a later time.
I hope so.
You can find more interviews on our YouTube channel at Marney Reid Presents.